Hi, my name's Aaron Becker, and today I thought I'd share with you a little bit about how I made the books Journey, Quest, and Return. I started working on Journey a long time ago, probably back when I was a kid, when I first started thinking about making a picture book. But it wasn't until years later, when my daughter was first born, that I thought about, hey, you know what? I've always wanted to do that thing, so maybe I should give it a shot. One day I went out onto the back porch, and I had a big sheet of paper, and I just started drawing one line after the other, after the other. After a whole day of drawing, it started to take form into something like this picture you're looking at. But if you look closely, you'll see that this big picture is just made up of little lines, one after the other. It just took some patience and a couple days of drawing, and then all of a sudden I had this drawing of a castle in this amazing place far away, and I wasn't sure what the story was or who the characters would be, and for some reason I drew a little girl in a boat coming towards the castle. It seemed like there must be a story in here somewhere. So I got out another sheet of paper and I thought, well, let me ask some questions first. Who's this girl? How did she get here? How did she draw the boat? What's this castle? Why is it there? What's she going to do once she gets there? Here she is on her stoop. She's back home. She has to be somewhere else before she gets to the castle after all. Now she's sad and lonely and bored, and no one will play with her. So she goes into her house. Her dad's busy, her mom's busy, her big sister's busy. So she goes back to her room. And when her cat gets up from its nap, she notices something there on the floor. A magical red drawing implement. Now some of you might think that it's a chalk or crayon, maybe a marker, maybe a colored pencil. It could be anything. Now this is a wordless picture book, so I wasn't able to write in there what it is, but today I'm going to tell you what it actually is, what she's actually drawing with. So this is how we're going to figure it out. Close your eyes just before I tell you what it is, and I want you to imagine what you think it is. Not what it looks like in the book, not a cartoon, but a real thing that you could draw with. Maybe it has lead or ink. Maybe it's got paper that you peel off to draw with it, or a cap that you have to take on and off. Picture what it looks like in your head. Okay, now open your eyes. If you can remember what it was in your head, now I'm going to tell you what it really is. The girl in these books is actually drawing with the thing that's in your head. That's how a wordless picture book works. You are telling the story. It's your story. So here she is, she's drawing the door on her wall. It opens up, and she goes through into this magical realm. When I had drawn these little teeny drawings, they're called thumbnails, and back when I used to work in the film industry, I used to draw these things called storyboards. They're a lot like these thumbnail drawings, and it would help the director figure out what their movie was going to be like. So I did the same thing with my story about this castle and this girl that got to this castle and how it all would work. But then I realized, most books have words. I should put some words in this story. I went back to the very beginning, and I thought, okay, now what are the words going to be in my book? There's a girl sitting on her stoop. She's sad, lonely, and bored. No one will play with her. Her mom's too busy, her dad's busy, her big sister's busy. So she goes back to her room, and when her cat wakes up from its nap, wait a minute. I've already told the story. I've already told the story with just pictures. I don't need words. And that is how Journey became a wordless picture book. It wasn't something I set out to do. It just kind of came about naturally as I started to imagine and create. And that's sometimes how creative things happen. It's not because you know where you're going to end up, but just because you move one foot in front of the other, and before long, you've made something. Might not be what you planned, but you made something. Now, so I got this story in shape, and then I needed to find a publisher. And a publisher is someone who helps someone like me who's written a book get it out into the world. Now, I can't draw hundreds of thousands of copies of my book and send them all over the world. I need someone to help me, and that's what a publisher does. So what I did is I built something, and it looked kind of like this. I learned how to make a book, a real book that you could pick up and hold. And I learned how to put it together piece by piece, just like the drawing was drawn one line at a time. Well, I had to slow down and figure out what are the steps of making a book. I didn't just want to staple it together. I wanted it to look, really good so that the publisher was impressed and wanted to make a book with me. They get lots of ideas, and I needed to stand out. I learned that books like this are sewn together. I didn't have a machine to sew the pages together, so I had to do it by hand, and I punched holes in all the paper, and I sewed it together with needle and thread. And then I glued that paper together using a special kind of glue that doesn't really create too many wrinkles. And then I put it on cardboard, and then I wanted the cardboard to look good, so I covered that with colored paper and even linen and cloth. And I sent it out to a publisher, and they got it, and they flipped through it, and they realized, hey, we do want to make this book. Well, once I got that news, I was pretty excited. I'd always wanted to make a book ever since I was a kid, and here was my chance, but I'd never done it before. I had to figure it all out. The first thing I figured I should do is some research, so I went to the library and I started looking up places that felt magical to me, places that I might use for ideas in my book. Here's a castle in France, a neighborhood in Washington, D.C. that the girls' neighborhood was based on, and a village in Germany. I had to figure out costumes, props, like the birdcage or the helmet of the knights. And then I went back to my drawings, and I knew it couldn't just be a little loose drawing like this with pencil. I wanted it to look as good as it could look with the skills that I had. I'd never painted in watercolor before as an artist, as a grown-up, and I wanted to do it in watercolor. It seemed like it was the right medium to give it a dreamy feeling. I also wanted it to be really detailed, so I took a drawing like this, and one of the things I did when I worked in film is I learned how to build stuff in 3D, and that's what I did with this castle. It may look complicated, much like the drawing of the castle looked complicated, but if you break it down into parts, nothing's complicated. It's just a bunch of little things that add up to being complicated. So this is a big drawing or a big model of a castle that's just made up of one shape after another shape after another shape. Squares, circles, domes, triangles, arches. Now I had this drawing, or I had this model of the castle. I printed it out onto paper really lightly so I could see what it looked like. And then I did another pencil drawing. And from this pencil drawing, with all the detail in there that I wanted, I printed it out lightly onto watercolor paper, and I traced those lines with ink, and then I did a watercolor wash. This is what my studio looks like at home. I like to draw with lots of natural light if I can. And here are some of the supplies I use. For my watercolor brush, I use a nice big fat watercolor brush. It allows a lot of water to get on there so that I don't have to keep dipping it back in. And I can make nice big washes or tiny little details. Even this big fat brush has a nice point at the end that I can use for the details. I don't use regular tray dried watercolor that you might use in art class. If you go to an art store, you can actually find this. It's watercolor that comes in a tube, and you can see the brown one here in the picture that I use. I also use a dip pen for my ink, which is acrylic ink, and that can dry before I put on the watercolor. Here I am working on the Lantern Forest picture from Journey, and you can see that right now I must have just finished the blue lines that are on the lanterns, because you can see the blue ink there and my dip pen. Once I do all of the ink work, I go back in and I do the watercolor, one layer at a time. Here I am working on the castle. Once the book is finished, I have to figure out what the cover is going to look like. I went through a few versions until I landed on the one that we see. Journey was the first picture book I made as a grown-up, but it wasn't the first picture book I made. This was one of the ones I did when I was a kid. I learned how to draw back then from a guy named Ed Emberley. He's still making books today, and what I like about his books is that he teaches you how to make complicated things from simple shapes. Here you can see how he teaches you how to draw fish from lines, curves, little dashes and dots. I did the same thing, and I made lots of books. Here's one with words in it, about a unicorn in a castle. Here's one about a dinosaur and a bear. Now, there's probably things that you're really interested in doing. Maybe it's not art. Maybe it's athletics. Maybe it's dancing, something like that. And what happens is when you're a kid, you're just playing and having fun, and it doesn't seem like anything other than a game. But it's not. It's actually quite real. And as you practice these things you like to do, they come closer to you and closer to you. And what happened to me as a kid is I kept practicing my drawing, and then one day it came so close to me that it became part of who I was. And all of a sudden, the idea of being an author one day seemed like it was who I would be. I made my own biography on the back of a book. I wrote it out. I found my class picture, and I glued it into the back of the book, because I'd seen that on books too, where the author's picture is in the back of the book. And this is how something that was just something in my imagination suddenly started to become real. It started to become part of who I was. I hope that you enjoyed looking into the process of making these books, and I hope that you guys remember to practice the things you enjoy doing. Start practicing and seeing if they can come closer and closer to you, because one day, without even knowing it, they might become a part of who you are and who you'll become.